In this series, we're going to talk about security within WordPress. The page we're looking at here is part of the WordPress Codex, and you can find it at wordpress.org. And this page is called Hardening Wordpress, and talks mostly about making WordPress itself more secure. We're also going to talk about some general web security. This page is quite long and gives some really excellent tips, and I highly recommend you read through it. It doesn't necessarily give the how of doing these things, though, so I'm hoping that this series can help with that. I hope you'll join me, and I hope at the end that your website is more secure. In this session, we're going to talk about passwords. Passwords are a bit of a wild card when it comes to security, because no matter how well the programmer makes the program, if the end user provides easy access to it with a weak password, the whole thing is a wash. So we're going to talk about how to make good passwords and how to enforce them within WordPress. I'd like to use this cartoon from XKCD as an example of how to make some good passwords. In the top left, you see a common, mixed up, hard to remember password. And here it shows that there are 28 bits of entropy. And it's easy to guess. It could take about 3 days at 1,000 guesses per second. However, if you use 4 random normal words, we go to 44 bits of entropy, and it could take 550 years to guess. This is called a passphrase as opposed to a password. And the longer your passphrase, the more difficult it is to break. I recommend using a whole sentence rather than simply 4 random words. Now I want to show you something within WordPress here. I'm going to add a new user. And we'll go down to the password section, and I'm going to put in 1234. And you can see that WordPress tells me that this is a very weak password. However, it doesn't prevent me from using that very weak password. And that's a bit of a problem. I can put in a longer password. I'll use a passphrase called "This is the end of the world." There. Now WordPress thinks that this is a strong password. So what can we do to enforce it? There are a number of plugins, and we're going to take a look at this one called Force Strong Passwords. Now, WordPress 3.7 is the one that introduced that excellent meter that tells you how strong your password is. This plugin merely makes it so that you cannot use a password if WordPress tells you that it's weak. There are a number of things you can do with this if you're a programmer, but we're going to take a look at it out of the box. There. Now let's try adding a new user with a weak password. I've used 1234. We'll even make this person an administrator. And here at the top it says error. Please make the password a strong one. And just like that, we've blocked this user from having a weak password. This also applies to existing users resetting their password. Now you may think, this isn't really a problem for me, I'm the only one on my site. And if that's the case, and you're always very careful, then you don't need this plugin. However, if you have multiple users on your site, and you ask them to reset their passwords, or to create their own new password the first time, you want this plugin to enforce what you already know, that you need a really good password. There are some plugins which will also require an end user to reset their password every so often, maybe every 2 weeks or 3 months or whatever. I don't really recommend this. Studies have shown that psychologically people really hate that, and so what they tend to do is simply add one character to their old password, which doesn't really change it very much. So I prefer simply requiring that they have a really good password. In this session, we're going to talk about one of many ways to stop people from even trying to attack your site. One of the ways that people try to attack is called a brute force attack, where they simply go to your login page and try to log in as many times as they can. You might get 5 or 10 times per second. They just try every username and password combination they can think of. This can be annoying, even if you have secure passwords and they don't break in, because every time they load up that login page, WordPress spins up and accesses the database and runs some PHP and all that kind of stuff. And that uses your system resources. So if someone is loading that login page 10 times per second, then the people accessing the front of your website, who are actual visitors, get your site much more slowly. And this can be a real problem. So let's take a look at a good way to stop that kind of thing. In another window, I have our login page here, and it's wp-login.php. If I simply go to wp-admin, then it takes me to the same page. So what we really want to stop is people accessing wp-login.php. There's an excellent plugin called Rename wp-login.php. As soon as you activate it, it takes you here to the Permalinks page in Settings and asks you to rename wp-login.php. Now I recommend that up here under Common Settings, you set your permalink structure to postname. Then your URL is simply your main URL / whatever you wish. Now you can leave it at login, but that's pretty easy to guess, so I'd make it something different. I'm going to make mine OST login, which they still might guess, but it's unlikely because it's not actually people who are hammering on your site. It's programs, it's robots. They're not going to be able to think and guess different paths. There. Now I've saved my changes. Now it says here at the top you want to bookmark this page, because if you forget, you're going to have a hard time logging into your site. So let's take a look now. There. Now when I go to wp-login.php, I get a 404 page. That's great. However, WordPress is still spinning up. It's still accessing the database and loading all my widgets and getting my site title and all of that kind of stuff. What I actually want is to stop people from even being able to load this page at all. And there's a little bit of code that I can show you that can help with that. This file is called .htaccess. You can see the name here. There's a dot at the beginning, which is why it's called .htaccess. This file sits in the main folder of your WordPress install, and it'll have something like this in it. This assumes that you're using Apache as your web server, but that's a pretty safe guess. Most people do. If you don't have this file, don't worry about it. Now right here, I have 3 lines that were commented out a moment ago, and I just uncommented them. This tells the server, anybody trying to get to wp-login.php, deny them. And what it actually does is serve a 403 error. Whereas before we had 404 not found. 403 is actually forbidden. So now let's try it. And there we go. We get this plain ugly page, which is fine because it's a robot accessing this. We don't care about giving them a good page. But now WordPress is not spinning up. No database accesses, no PHP running. It's just a very plain, simple HTML page. And this takes far fewer resources. So now what we've done is block the bots from attacking us, as well as stop them from using up all of our system resources. This can make your site run a lot faster if you're under regular attack. So to review, what we've done is install a plugin which renames wp-login.php. Then we put in a little bit of code to serve a different kind of error to people who access that. Now, if you're the only one using your site, simply bookmark your new login page and you're all set. If you have multiple users, you'll need to be sure that they know what you've done. Otherwise, you're going to get calls during dinner time, and nobody wants that. In this session, we're going to take a look at a little trick for securing your wp-config file. wp-config holds your username and password for your database access. This is a very, very important file. If it's not secure, then people can get into your database and do all kinds of bad things. Now, if you simply go to it on the web, you get a blank page. But if PHP were to accidentally be turned off through an error on your host side or your own in your panel or whatever, then people would be able to download this file and get whatever's inside. Now, as an example of how important it is to keep it, I'm going to get rid of it. I'm going to move it here up 2 folders. And now we don't have a WP config file. And here's what happens. It wants to make one. So you need one. I'm going to put it back. And there we are, back again. So what can we do here? Well, something that the WordPress creators have done is made it so that you may move your wp-config file up 1 folder. So here where I have all of my WordPress files is called my document root. And mine is called htdocs. Yours might be called public_HTML or www or whatever. But you can take wp-config and move it up 1 folder. And it will continue to work. But now, if someone were to go there, they'd get a 404 because it doesn't exist right there. That one simple step made it so that if something terrible happens and PHP is turned off or whatever, wp-config is no longer accessible. Things outside of your document root are not accessible from the web. They are accessible via PHP, which is why WordPress is able to go up 1 folder and grab your WP config file. So I recommend this for every install of WordPress. Simply move your wp-config file 1 folder up from your site install. This really only works if you have 1 WordPress install on this document root, because you can't have more than 1 wp-config in this folder. But most people only have 1 install, and if that's you, then this is something you should probably do. In this session, we're going to talk about a username called admin. For a long, long time, every WordPress install came with a user called admin, and this user could not be deleted. This made it a wonderful target for hackers trying to break in, because they knew half of the equation of a username and password. They knew there was a username called admin, and all they had to do was throw passwords at it. At some point, WordPress made it so that you did not have to have a username called admin, and furthermore, didn't automatically create one. When you're installing WordPress for the first time, it simply asks you to create a new user. So now, it is strongly recommended that you not have a username called admin. It simply removes an attack vector. There are still scripts out there that will hammer on your website trying to log in as admin. And if you don't have that user, they are simply never going to log in with that user. But what do you do if you already have one? Never fear, it's not that hard to fix. First, create a new user. Be sure to give it a good password. I'm not going to send this password to the new user by email because it's me. Be sure to make it an administrator. There. Now, be sure you're logged out of admin and logged into your new administrator. And now we're going to delete the admin user. Note, you can't delete the account you're currently logged in as, which is why it was so important to log out of admin. Otherwise, you wouldn't be able to delete it. So now we delete it. And it says over here we have one post, and I'll show you what's going to happen to that post. Before we delete, it asks us what we want to do with the content owned by this user. You could delete it all, or you could attribute it all to some other user. And I'm going to use the new user that I created. There. Now, admin no longer exists, and that post now belongs to the new user. So we've gotten rid of admin, we haven't lost any content, and the content we had is properly attributed to the new user. If you have an account called admin, I strongly recommend you remove it, regardless of whether you use it or not. It is a very common attack vector, and getting rid of it is easy, painless, and simply removes one more way for you to be attacked. In this session, we're going to take a look at something that has nothing to do with WordPress or Joomla or Drupal or any other content management system. It deals specifically with moving files between your computer and your server. Occasionally, you need to copy a file from your machine to your server or in the reverse direction. For example, sometimes Google will give you a file and say, put this on your server to prove that it's your server. And you may be inclined to use FTP. And I'm going to suggest to you today that you should never, ever, ever use FTP for anything ever again. Why, you ask? Because it is insecure. When you log into a server with FTP, it sends your username and password across the internet in the clear. If you are at a coffee shop or any place else with open Wi-Fi, anybody else on that Wi-Fi can be watching your connection and just grab that information and do anything they want with it. And to some that may sound like a far-fetched scenario, but I'm here to tell you that it happens all the time. There are plenty of people in the world with more time than they know what to do with, and they think it's neato to grab somebody's FTP username and password and deface their website. So what are your options? Well, my favorite option is called Sftp. Most FTP clients support it now. We're looking at CyberDuck here for the Mac, but just about every modern FTP client supports Sftp. If I click Open Connection, FTP is their suggested one, but then there's FTP SSL, which is fine, it's also encrypted, Sftp, which is encrypted, WebDave, which you probably won't get to use. This one's not encrypted. You should be using this one if you're going to use that. Once you connect this way, everything is exactly the same as with FTP. You won't even know the difference. But all of your transmissions back and forth are then encrypted, and no one can snoop on you. This is pretty important. Logging in with FTP exposes your username and password to the world, and you should simply never do it. If you're in Windows, I really like a program called WinSCP. And here's the web page for it. It's a free app, very easy to use. I really recommend it if you're on Windows. On the Mac, I like CyberDuck, but most FTP clients for the Mac support Sftp also. So please, switch to it as soon as you can if you're going to be copying files. In this session, we're going to talk about how to install PhpMyAdmin, which is a database administration tool. This tool will allow you to make backups of your database and peek inside and see what's going on in there. You'll want to be careful with this, but it's not too hard to use. We're here at phpmyadmin.net, and you can see here there's a link to download 4.2.7. I actually suggest instead we go to the Download tab in the top here And then if you wish, you can download only the English version, which is actually a much smaller file. There's a zip file, a tar file, a targz file, a tarxz file, and a tarbz2 file. If you're unfamiliar with these, then I suggest you download the zip file. I'm going to save this to my downloads folder, and here it is at the top. And now I have this folder called PhpMyAdmin 4.2.7 English. I'm going to copy that, and now I'm going to go to my document root, which we talked about in another session. I'm going to paste it right here. I'm going to rename it something much shorter and easier to remember, but not necessarily easy to guess. It wouldn't be terrible if somebody guessed it and got to the login page, but if they can't find it, it's just one less attack vector. So I'm going to call it myPMA. Now, we're going to go inside this folder, and there is a file called config.sample.inc.php. We want to rename that to simply config.inc.php. Then you want to open it in your favorite editor. My favorite editor happens to be Vim, but you could do this in any text editor. Right here at the top is a Blowfish secret. You want to change this to anything else. This is called assault, which we talked about in another session. And now you can visit that directory. And there's PhpMyAdmin. So to reiterate, in my document root, I made a folder called myPMA that has the PhpMyAdmin I just downloaded. I edited config.inc.php and changed the salt, and then I simply visited there in my browser. Now, you may be wondering, what is your username and password? Well, your wp config file holds that information. You can see here, there's a database name, which we don't need to know right now. There's the database user, the database password, and the database host. Now, because I'm running a local server on my machine right here on my lap, my username and password are ridiculously simple. Yours will probably be more complex. Something else that you may need to change in your PhpMyAdmin config file is the host. It's usually localhost, which is what's in there by default. But some hosts use something different. DreamHost commonly uses something else. So you might need to come down here to this line, which has localhost, and change it to whatever you find in wp-config. So now we'll log in. On the left here, you can see that I have actually a bunch of databases, but OS Training is the one I'm worried about. And I got that information also from wp-config, right here at the top, db name OS Training. So now I'm looking at my database. One of the simplest, easy things to do is to export the whole thing. Now you could simply hit Go right here, but there's one more step I like. I'm going to hit Custom, and I'll scroll down here to Add Drop Table. That makes it so that if you want to re-import what we're exporting here, it will get rid of the old stuff for you first. You don't have to do that manually. And now it's offering me ostraining.sql. I'm going to hit Save File, and I like to give them a date in the file name so that I know when I made this. And I'm going to put this in my OS Training folder. There. Now I have a backup of my entire database. I can show you how useful that is. I'm going to go to my site. It's working. It's great. Something terrible happens, and my options table just disappears. I load my site, and it goes, oh, I don't know what to do. So now, in PhpMyAdmin, I go to Import, browse to that file that I made. And hit go. Import has been successfully finished. And everything is back. Now this is a very manual backup of the database. Ideally, you have site backup software, which is taking care of all this for you. However, if you're going to be messing around in your database and poking at things that you maybe shouldn't be poking at, you should make this backup beforehand. In our next session, we're going to take a look at changing some things in the database. And I'll strongly recommend that you make a backup before we do that. So in summary, we've installed PhpMyAdmin, a database administration tool, which allows you to see the contents of your database. Here are some posts. There's my user, etc. You probably shouldn't be messing around in here, but the time may come when you may need to, and this tool will allow you to do that. In this session, we're going to take a look at turning off a feature of WordPress, which I suspect you rarely use, but could be used to break your site. We're looking at the plugins page here, and you can see I have 4 strong passwords and WordPress reset. In the left, below Add New, there's Editor. And within here, I can edit all of the files of these plugins. Then if you go to Appearance, there's another editor. And you can edit all of the files of all of the themes you have installed. Personally, I have never used this feature. If I'm going to be editing these files, I'm probably going to do it in my real editor. Leaving it open means that anybody with administrator access can come in here and drop in any code they want. It's a fringe scenario. Theoretically, you trust all your administrators. But if somebody broke in and you didn't notice, they could put some code in here and cause you some trouble. So let's look at turning it off. This is the Hardening WordPress document from the WordPress Codex. And it says we can take this one line and put it into WP config. And it will take care of that. So let's do that. I'm simply going to stick it right here at the top. And then we'll reload my page. And now the editor link is gone from appearances, as well as from plugins. So just like that, we removed one more attack vector. Not a strong one, but it was there, and now it's not, and now you're that much more secure. In this session, we're going to talk about one of the most important parts of maintaining the security of your WordPress website, and that's keeping your software up to date. Starting with WordPress 3.7 and up, WordPress will automatically update itself for minor and security updates. So if you have 3.7 and 3.7.1 comes out, it'll automatically update itself to 3.7.1. This may sound a little bit spooky, but they've done an enormous amount of testing, and the failures are very, very rare. Now this doesn't help you when there's a major version of WordPress that comes out. For example, 4.0 is coming out soon. You'll need to run the update for that yourself. Now it's possible to configure WordPress to auto-update plugins as well, but I really don't recommend that because very few plugins have done the kind of testing that WordPress core has done to make sure that nothing bad is going to happen. So when there's a new version of a plugin, you should update it, and the same goes for themes. But sometimes you may not know that there's a new version. For this reason, I like a plugin called Wp Updates Notifier. All it does is check your site at least daily, optionally hourly, or twice daily, and sends you an email when there's a new version of your plugins. Here's a copy of an email just like that. It tells me that I need to update Contact Form 7 and WP Supercache. It has links to the details and the change log, as well as a note about compatibility. Having a plugin like this on your site helps make sure that you're going to know when there's a new version. Very often, plugin releases are for security issues, and staying on top of them will ensure that you have the latest security patches. If you choose not to use a plugin, like WP Updates Notifier, please keep an eye on your site. Know when there are releases of software. If you're not comfortable doing updates yourself, there are a number of services that will help you with that. $5 or $10 a month will make it so that someone who is skilled with WordPress can log in and do your updates for you and fix any issues that arise. I promise you, this is much cheaper than fixing your site once it's been hacked because you had an old plugin. One of the most valuable elements of security on your website is knowing what's going on. And a good logging tool can help you know what's going on your website. In this session, we're going to take a look at one of those logging tools. It's called Stream. Now that it's installed, we have an icon here under the dashboard. And here's the log. There are no items found yet because nothing really has happened yet. Let's take a look at the settings. This is who may access the log file. And right now it's set to only administrators. Private feeds allow specific users to have access to the log file in a variety of formats so that they can do a variety of things with it. We're set to keep records for 90 days, and then optionally we can reset the stream database. Now something we want to do right away is save permalinks so that Stream knows where things are. Now let's go back and look at Stream again. There, it says a minute ago, permalink setting was updated by me, and it tells me where and in what context, and what happened, and my IP address. Stream keeps track of everything that happens in the admin area of your website, who does it, when, and all of that. And then there are filters here that you can limit your search so that you can look at specific users or specific actions or whatever. And then there's a search here so that you can search through them. At the moment, this log file is kept in a database table in the same database as your WordPress install. Starting with the next version of Stream, your log file will be kept off-site, so that if your site blows up or gets wiped out by a hacker, you still have your log file and you can still see what was going on. A tool like this is extremely valuable in helping you figure out what happened after the fact. And it can help you understand what might be coming if you see somebody trying the same thing over and over again. Stream is a freemium plugin, which means there are things you can get if you pay for it. There's a data exporter. Notifications is great. You can get notifications right on your cell phone when things happen. There's a WooCommerce connector so that you can keep track of what happens in your store. A reports generator. And Cherrypick allows you to delete individual records. Paying for Stream gets you access to all of these extensions. But you don't need to. If all you really want is a log file, the free version works great. If you're the only user of a given site, it becomes fairly obvious when something else is going on. If you log in, look at your stream, and see that there are things happening that you didn't do. If you have a multi-user site, then Stream allows you to keep an eye on what's going on in their world as well, to see who's doing what, who's posting what, etc. Stream uses very, very few resources, so I recommend that everyone run it, just to keep an eye on what's going on their website. In this session, we're going to take a look at how to stop bad queries coming to your website. A query is actually any page load. But if the code behind your website is not secure, then it's possible to send information through the URL to your code to abuse it and make it do things that you shouldn't, and make it do things that it shouldn't. We're looking here at a plugin called Block Bad Queries. And it's built on a regular PHP script that wasn't necessarily specifically for WordPress. Let's take a look at that. Here are some examples of some bad URLs. This one right here, the %2e is the escape code for a dot. So it's saying to your code, go up 2 directories and maybe see what's there. Base 64 is a string that is used in encoding and decoding bits of code so that it can run without you knowing what it is. Here are some examples of things that it looks for. Eval, concat, which is a database string, localhost, www.root, etc password, which is where your passwords are stored, DLL files, and all kinds of stuff like that. And then here it also looks at user agents, which are browser names, like libwww and Jakarta. And then if it finds any of this stuff, it sends a 403 forbidden. Let's load it up and take a look. Now before I activate it, I'm going to go to one of their test URLs. Let's go to this one. There. And you can see it converted to ... Now, because my site is secure, it didn't really do anything. But it still let it try. Now let's activate this plugin and try again. There. Now we have a white screen, but what does that mean? Well, I have here a tool called Live HTTP Headers, which tells me the communication happening between the server and my browser. And we can see that what the server sent is actually a 403 forbidden, which means I'm not allowed to try to do this. Now, WordPress itself is almost certainly not vulnerable to these kinds of attacks. However, plugins may very well be. Using block bad queries can help put up a defense against poorly written plugins that may not sanitize and escape their code the way they should. It also sends a message to people trying to break into your site that you're smart enough to avoid that kind of thing and that they should look elsewhere. In this session, we're going to talk about a script called TimThumb. TimThumb is a wonderful idea that uses PHP to manipulate images on the fly so that you can write a little bit of code that will grab an image and either resize it or reshape it or whatever, and then serve it up to the end user. And then it will cache that image so that it can reuse it again. The problem is that twice in the last couple of years, there have been significant, severe security problems with it. Problems that allow hackers to do anything they want to your server. It's strongly recommended that you not use it, but there are still a great number of themes and plugins that include it. Now, theoretically, the latest version does not have any security problems, but then they thought that right before they found the last ones. So first, what I'm going to do is show you how to find out if you have a bad version. WordPress has a plugin called the TimThumb Vulnerability Scanner. Once you activate it, you can look under Tools for the scanner. And then you simply hit Scan. And this searches all of the files you have. So it looks through all of WordPress, all of your plugins, all of your themes, everything. As you can see, I found one vulnerable version. Now it says it's in the WordPress Reset plugin, but I confess I placed it there because I needed an example for this. It's actually getting kind of hard to find TimThumb these days because it has such a bad reputation. But if it finds one that's vulnerable, you can simply check it and update selected files. And it updates it to the newest version. And that's great. This version theoretically doesn't have any security problems. However, TimThumb is notorious for having security problems, so I would recommend that you get rid of whatever theme or plugin you're using that has it. If there are no replacements for those themes or plugins, then you may have to live with it. But at least make sure you have the latest version and that you watch this constantly. Keep an eye on the news. If there's a flaw in TimThumb, it'll be all over the internet. So to reiterate, please try not to use any themes or plugins that use it. But you can use this plugin, the Vulnerability Scanner, to look for copies and update them to the latest version. In this session, we're going to talk about something that's a little bit esoteric, and you probably will never need to do this. But it's something that will be very, very important to do if you are ever concerned about an intrusion on your site. We're going to talk about the code that encrypts your login cookies. Cookies are little bits of information that are stored on your computer by a website, and they can hold anything really. But when you log into WordPress, it sets a cookie. The information in that cookie is encrypted. I want to show you how you can see these cookies. I'm in Firefox and I'm going to Preferences, under Privacy, Show Cookies. The process is similar in Chrome. You can see here that I have a whole bunch of cookies, and my search is narrowing it. And for the domain that I'm on right now, ostraining.dev, I have no cookies. But if I log in, now that I've logged in, let's take a look again. There. Now I have a test cookie. And I have some here with some random information there, and some settings. Here you can see what's inside the cookie. The test cookie is just a cookie check. Basically, it's testing to make sure that it can set cookies before it tries to set real ones. Here I have some settings, some time. Now these with random information, the content is just more random information. That's because it's encrypted. That makes it so nefarious code can't get into your cookies and find your username and password. Now the code within WordPress that manages this is called a salt. Here I'm looking at my wp-config.php file. You have one of these files, and within it you have these lines of code. Now this information here on the right is actually really random. It's not code for something, it's just random text, and that's called a salt. The code that encrypts your cookies uses this bit of information to get randomness so that it can't be guessed. Now if you ever have an intrusion and someone steals your salts, then they can decrypt the cookies of any of your users and get into your site. So if you suspect you've had an intrusion and somebody may have at some point downloaded your WP config file, you'll want to reset these. And that's very easy to do, and I'll show you. I did a search for WordPress salt, and at the top here we have a link to api.wordpress.org/secret-key/1.1/salt. And that takes me here. Every time this page is loaded, it makes new random salts. So you can use any of these, and they will be different from everybody else in the entire world. And you simply copy everything here, remove the old ones, and paste in the new ones. And you're all set. Now if anyone is currently logged in, it will log them out because it doesn't match the encryption in their current cookies. But then they can simply log in again. Now as I mentioned at the beginning of this, I hope that you never have to do this. If your wp-config file is never compromised, you never need to do it. Every install of WordPress comes with its own custom set, so you don't need to reset them after a new install or anything like that. However, if you ever think that your site's been compromised, simply make a new set of salts and drop them in here, and you should be all set. So far in this series on security, we've talked about small implementations for specific problems. Now we're going to take a look at a plugin called iThemes Security, which used to be called Better WP Security, which is kind of a one-stop shop for all of your security needs. It does many of the things that we've already covered, and it does a few more that we haven't. I'm not always excited about plugins that claim to be a one-stop shop for everything you need, because if one part of it breaks, then you have to throw out the rest of it as well. But iThemes Security has a pretty good reputation, and I know the people that build it. So we're going to take a look and see what we think of it. This is a freemium plugin, which means it does many things for free, but there's also a paid version. It does some things through obscurity, like hiding WP Login, like we did before with Rename WP Login. It can rename the admin account, which we did manually, and a variety of other things. And then through protection, it can set permissions on files and block bad queries, like we did with another plugin. It also does detection. It can scan for malware and look for bots trying to break in. And then within this plugin, they have database backups, which I showed you how to do manually with PhpMyAdmin. Now iThemes also makes Backup Buddy, which is a really great backup plugin, and so these two work together very well. This plugin has its own set of video tutorials provided by the authors. So if you decide you really love this plugin, I recommend you watch all of them. The pay version is as little as $80 for a personal site. It gives you 2 licenses, so you can run 2 sites with it. So let's install it and see what we think. And there we are. Now right here, right on this page, there's a new banner at the top to see what's new in 4.0 and to secure your site now. On the left we have the security menu item. Let's see what secure your site now gets us. They want us to make a backup of our database. Let's give it a shot. Backup completed. Please check your email or uploads folder. Alright. Now allow file updates. Many of the functions of this plugin require editing your wp-configure.htaccess files. Would you like to allow us to safely update these files for you automatically? Alright, that's set. Now use the button below to enable default settings. This feature will enable all settings that cannot conflict with other plugins or themes. There we are. Check the dashboard for further suggestions on securing your site and help them improve. Let's dismiss that. Alright, so here's the dashboard. Right at the top it says don't lock yourself out. So we're going to temporarily whitelist our IP address. And it's whitelisted until tomorrow at 8 p.m. Here on the dashboard there are some walkthrough videos. We have the ability to set up scheduled database backups and malware scanning. It says your website is not protected against bots looking for known vulnerabilities. This is the kind of thing that Block Bad Queries was doing for us. Let's turn that on. So this will serve them a 404. These things are whitelisted. These things are ignored. So we'll save that. Now let's go back to the dashboard. Your WordPress dashboard is available 24/7. Do you really update 24 hours a day? Consider using away mode. Away mode is pretty cool. Basically, you could say, between these hours, I will never be on my website. Lock it down. And not even you can get in during that time. It makes it basically locked up tight. So you could set it between midnight and 4 a.m. if you are sure you're never going to get up in the middle of the night and update your website. We can have it look for changed files. This is really useful because plugins like TimThumb with their vulnerabilities allow hackers to put nefarious code into existing files, and you won't even know the difference. Let's see what this can do for us. Split file checking into chunks. Split file checking into 7 chunks: plugins, themes, WP-admin, WP includes, uploads, and the rest of WP content, and everything that is left over, and divides the check evenly over the course of the day. This feature may result in more notifications, but it will allow for the scanning of bigger sites to continue, even on a lower-end web host. I like that. We're going to turn that on. And then here we can choose what files we want to exclude. Now keep in mind, this is going to alert you even if you change a file. So if there's a file that you know you regularly update, you may want to exclude that one. I'm going to leave mine alone. It ignores images because you might overwrite an image. And then it can email file change notifications and display file change admin warning. Now here it says we have some rewrite rules that have been saved to nginx.conf. We must restart our nginx server for the settings to take effect. So I would have to restart my server. If you're on a regular host, they're probably going to take care of that kind of thing for you. I'm running on my local machine here. It says your WordPress dashboard is using the default addresses. This can make a brute force attack much easier. This is the kind of thing we solved earlier with rename wp-login.php. Let's see how they do it. So here we can name it anything we want. I'm going to make mine CV. They can enable theme compatibility. If you see these errors in your theme when using hide backend, in particular when going to WP-admin when not logged in, turn on this to fix them. And then here's where it can send them. And here's where you can put in something custom if you have a plugin that messes around with your logging in. Now here it says, warning, your admin URL has changed. Use the following URL to log into your site. CV login. So let's give it a shot. And here's what it gets when I try. Let's try this. Same thing. So now, there we are. So it essentially behaves exactly like rename wp-login.php. It says here you're not protecting common WordPress files from access. Click here to protect them. Let's see what we get. This says prevent public access to readme.html, readme.txt, wp-config, install, wp includes, and htaccess. These files can give away important information on your site. So we'll block those. Here are some request methods we can reject. And suspicious query strings. This is similar to block bad queries. Non-English characters in the query string. Very long URLs, which WordPress does not use by default. Here we can remove file writing permissions. I'm not going to do that yet because I may want this plugin to write to those files for now. And then disable PHP in uploads. So this would prevent somebody from uploading a PHP file. We'll take a look at some of the rest of these in the next session. In this session, we're going to finish up a review of iThemes security. We're looking right now at the low priority options that they suggest on the dashboard. The first one is you're not blocking any users that are known to be a problem. Consider turning on the ban users feature. I'm the only user on my site, so I don't really need this. You're not requiring a secure connection for logins or for the admin area. This is pretty important. You should run an SSL certificate for your site. I'm running on my local machine here, so it would be quite difficult to do that. However, SSL is relatively easy to set up on most hosts. says WP config and htaccess are writable. I still want that, so I'm going to leave it on for now. Your WordPress installation is publishing the really simple discovery header. Click here to fix this. If you are using it, you don't want to turn it off. If you're not using it, you should turn it off. Users may be able to get version information from various plugins and themes. That doesn't bother me, so I'm going to leave it alone. This is a good one. XML-RPC is protecting you from the trackback and pingback attack, but is still available on your site. XML-RPC is the protocol that is used by the WordPress mobile app. So if you use that, you want to leave it on. It's not a bad thing at all. It's just abusable. So if you're not using it, go ahead and turn it off. It says your version of jQuery has not been determined. Load your home page while logged in to determine the version of jQuery you are using. Let's give that a shot. And now that item is just gone. Apparently they approve. And then you should rename the WP content directory of your site. Let's see what's involved there. Please note, changing the name of your WP content directory on a site that already has images and other content referencing it will break your site. For this reason, we highly recommend you only try this technique on a fresh WordPress install. Honestly, I wouldn't do it at all. The idea is good. It's a known attack vector. However, if you ever stopped using this plugin, then your WP content directory would be somewhere else, and WordPress wouldn't know how to deal with that either. So I recommend just leaving it alone. And then here's a list of all the things that we've done so far. Some of them were done automatically at the beginning when we clicked those buttons to say, secure my site. Here's some system information, PHP information, WordPress configuration, etc. Who's locked out, rewrite rules, and WP config rules. This is one that we actually entered ourselves in another session. So that's the dashboard. There's a settings tab, but interestingly, most of the stuff on the dashboard took us through most of the settings on the settings tab. Under advanced, it looks like we've already removed the admin user. We did that in another session. Here's where you can change the database prefix. We'll go over that in another session as well. Here's where you can create a database backup. iThemes Security is made by iThemes, which also makes Backup Buddy, which is an excellent plugin. Since they make both of them, they work hand in hand quite well. And then there are logs. This is a log of what happens in your site, similar to Stream. It's not quite as comprehensive, it's more related to security-specific things, but it's still pretty good. And then there's a Help tab. You can get free support, you can go pro and get pro support, you can even hire a security expert to review your site. And here you can get hack repair. All in all, I think this is a good plugin. My only qualms with it is that it is a one-stop shop, and I tend to be more of a boutique kind of guy where I like having individual small plugins do individual small things. If you don't mind having a one-stop shop, then this is a great plugin, and I can recommend it. In this session, we're going to look at the way your database tables are named. And this may sound a little scary at first, but it's not really. During your install of WordPress, they ask for your database username and password and database name, and they also ask you to prefix your database tables, and they suggest WP underscore. Now, WordPress has been suggesting WP underscore for 10 years now, and so it's very common and very well known. Everybody knows that if you get into a database, look for WP underscore users, and you can get the users table. But if you can change this prefix, then the automated scripts are not going to find your tables. We're looking at PhpMyAdmin here, and you can see that I have WP underscore as my prefix, and right there is WP underscore users. This is because this particular version of WordPress was installed with a script, which just took the defaults. If I had installed it by hand, I would have put in something else. But I didn't, so now I need to find a way to go back and change it. Now, it's not necessarily bad to use WP underscore as long as you include something else, anything else, as long as it's unusual and unique. My dog's name is Claire, and so I often use WP underscore Claire underscore. So even though I start with WP underscore, it's not WP underscore users that I have for a table name. It's WP underscore Claire underscore users. Now you can't simply rename all these tables. For one thing, in your WP config file, there's a line near the bottom which declares your table prefix. But again, you can't simply just change it here and then rename all your tables either, because inside your tables, inside the content, there are references to the prefix as well. So your best bet is to use a pre-made solution. Fortunately, built into iThemes security is a section right here called Change Database Prefix. And it says your database is using the default table prefix WP underscore. You should change this. They strongly recommend backing up your database, and I completely agree. When you're messing around with your database, back it up. Back it up like crazy. If you don't trust iThemes security to do it in PhpMyAdmin, just like I showed in another session. I have already backed it up, so I'm simply going to check this and hit Change Database Prefix. And now my current table prefix is TCYWN2RT. So rather than give me the option of making something up, which could be hackable, they made something random, which is acceptable. As you can see, I'm still in WordPress. It's still working. Let me look at my WP config file again, and you can see that line has changed. Let's go to the database and refresh, and you can see that all my tables have a new prefix. Now my tables will be much harder to find by an automated script. And to be honest, the vast majority of attacks are going to come from automated scripts. So to sum up, if you're doing a new install, when they ask you for the prefix, make something up. If you don't have the choice or you inherit a site that has the prefix wrong, you can use iThemes security to change it. This wraps up our series on security in WordPress. We've covered an awful lot of material, and we looked at an awful lot of different methods for doing a variety of things. I really need to stress that security is not made from software. Software helps you with security. Security is a mindset. You have to approach your website in a certain way and think about things like password security, file permissions, locations for things. Don't necessarily look for one plugin that's going to magically give you security. Think about security. Think about how someone might attack your site, and look for holes yourself. Most of what I've shown you in this series are plugins and pieces of software that do functions to help with security. But even they may fall down. You may find a security hole in a security plugin. There's also a lot more to security than just WordPress. We looked at several things in this series that aren't related to WordPress at all. You need to make sure that your connections are secure. You need to make sure that no one's looking over your shoulder while you're typing. If web security is important to you, then you should study it, also outside the context of WordPress. A great many things can be done outside the concept of WordPress to secure your website, and if those are done, then the requirement of securing WordPress gets much more minimal. If you have a secure server, you're much better off. If you have people who know what they're doing watching out for you, you're much better off. I hope this series has helped you, and I hope it prevents some long, horrible nights in the future.